Okay, welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat. And we are here with the rescheduled chat for Matthew Cox, and we're glad to have him. And so he is the author of the Vampire Innocent series, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Matthew Cox. I've been writing fiction in earnest since about 2012, but dabbling at it for probably 30 years or more. Got into writing at the suggestion of a former supervisor at my day job who asked me if I've ever written anything professionally because he liked the way I wrote emails out to customers. And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have this little 400,000 word book that I've been sitting on and not done anything with. But yeah, mostly I write cyberpunk, science fiction, fantasy, and of course the Vampire Innocent series, which is sort of a comedic, dramatic. It's kind of a blend. I had one reader call it a reverse Buffy. Sort of like the girl is the vampire instead of trying to kill them. But it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek, but it's got its dramatic moments too. Like in one moment, she'll be using her vampiric powers to compel people to buy her little sister's Girl Scout cookies because nobody was buying them. And then next, she's dealing with some heavy emotional stuff. So seems to work. Seems to work.
I like that use of vampire power. Buy the Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, well, Sarah is very family motivated, and a lot of readers have commented that they really like that about her character. Where she didn't know that vampires existed before she became one, and she had no idea she was about to become one. In the story, I mean, the book one starts off with her waking up in a morgue, not really remembering the past 3 days, doesn't know where she is. Takes her a few pages to figure out that she's in a body cooler, and then she kind of has a predictable freak out. But she had a really not nice ex-boyfriend, and she caught him cheating on her, tried to break up with him, and he responded by stabbing her. It just so happened that another vampire had been shadowing her that night, intending to feed on her. And Dalton, her sire, is kind of a softie, and he mistook her for being a little younger than she is. He thought she was like 15 or 16, not 18. So he didn't want to let her die, so he turned her into a vampire right then and there. So she wakes up, and her first thought upon realizing that she's a vampire is, well, I can't let my family think I'm dead, so she does everything she can to go home to her family. So you have this character who's an immortal vampire with all the powers of the undead living at home under her parents' roof.
Okay, yeah, that makes an interesting dynamic, I would think.
Yeah, and she's got 3 siblings. Her father is a big sort of geek into 80s movies and 80s stuff like that. Mom's a lawyer. Dad's a computer programmer. Her kids, her siblings are 3 completely different sort of people. Sophia's all sorts of shy and timid, but bookish. She reads a lot. Sierra's like this tough girl who doesn't take it from anybody, likes video games, is very unimpressed with the world. And her little brother, Sam, is just sort of like the whatever kid. He'll take anything in stride and just keep on going.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character. What's her personality like?
Well, Sarah is, well, to boil her down, she's very normal, I guess you would say. Prior to becoming a vampire, she was a very typical 18-year-old about to go to college. She had plans to go to USC in Southern California. But she's also a bit of a homebody. Her friends told her she would get homesick and come home in 2 months because she couldn't stand being that far away from home. And she sort of laughed it off. But before she could go away to school, the whole vampire thing happened, and she just became fixated with staying with the family at all costs and not letting anything tear them apart, so to speak. And so prior to her becoming a vampire, she was very sort of normal, like any 18-year-old wouldn't really want to hang out with their little siblings all the time, and had her friends and her stuff to do. And she was very, I don't want to say selfish because that makes her sound too nasty. She wasn't really selfish, but she put her own priorities above a lot, like any other 18-year-old would probably do, or, under normal circumstances. But after the vampire thing happened, she kind of went way far in the other direction. I mean, she has nostalgia fits, even though being a kid for her isn't that long ago. And it's all sort of this weird emotional thing that her brain chemistry is settling on as the transition to being an undead sets in. And she has to process this new reality, and then gets involved with the vampires of the area and realizing that there's a whole lot more to the world than she ever thought possible. In some of the later books, she deals with stuff like goblins. And there's a troll in one instance. I have an homage to the Frog Brothers from Lost Boys. Her family goes on vacation, and they run into a pair of 14 or 15-year-old brothers who are hunting vampires, and they're totally unaware she is one because her bloodline is her bloodline. The innocent. That's where the series title comes from. Her bloodline's thing is that she is the most lifelike among vampires. The innocent bloodline looks the most like a normal person. They're the weakest in terms of power, but they're the easiest to pass themselves off as still alive. And they also have some ability to tolerate moderate amounts of sunlight. In short, it burns their energy reserves up a lot, but she can go out in the day if it's gloomy, so to speak, where none of the other vampires can do that. But the trade-off is that she doesn't get any of the real awesome supernatural powers that some of the older vampires supposedly get.
Oh, cool. So tell us a little bit about a little more about the world. It's obviously an urban type fantasy, whereas you've got the modern world and the supernatural setting as well. So tell us a little bit about
the setting is relatively close to reality, other than the existence of vampires and goblins and stuff like that. She and her family live in Cottage Lake, Washington, except for a mild case of magical abduction to London. The action mostly takes place in and around the Pacific Northwest area. Where am I going with this? In her efforts to be normal, she actually winds up still going to college, though she goes to night school in Seattle instead of going to Southern California. She still, her conscious goal is to try to be as normal as possible, almost pretending that the whole vampire thing never happened, but reality isn't letting her off the hook that easy. Crazy stuff keeps intruding on her daily life. So, she's sitting there trying to hold it together as normal as possible, being as ordinary as an 18-year-old wants to be while all this vampire stuff is going on in her life. And she keeps getting dragged into the crazy situations around that.
Okay, so obviously with 12 books in the series and 13 on the way, as you mentioned before the show, it has I'm assuming you have a lot of antagonists throughout the series. So can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, let's see. The antagonists change from book to book, but there are a couple of common ones. Some of the traditionalist vampires in the area aren't terribly happy with her decision to stay at home with the mortal family. It's generally considered best practice for a vampire to allow the mortal world to believe they died and either go somewhere else where nobody knows them or just stay out of sight, so to speak. But Sarah didn't do that because she couldn't bear the thought of her parents and siblings suffering her loss. And so this one guy, Stefano Bianchi, and another vampire, Eleanor St. Ives, are kind of giving her the evil eye for doing that because they're afraid she's going to compromise all of vampiredom and have the mortals become aware, risk giving up the truth, so to speak, getting it out there. Early on, she's also visited by the Persons in Black, which reveal the government actually is aware of vampires. And it's a little bit mysterious what their relationship is to vampires, whether they're actually just kind of observing them in a, God, I hope these guys don't go crazy sort of way, or if they actually have some sort of influence over vampires yet. The Pibs haven't been too much of a presence, but Sarah's certain they're going to be a problem at some point. She's run into a crazy, another type of vampire is a sybarite, which they are highly dedicated to a particular form of art. It could be cooking or actual painting art or a profession or something. They have, I don't want to call it a hobby because that kind of underplays it, but whatever their thing is, they take it to an extreme. And in one of the books, Sarah runs into a ghost who asks her to help save his grandson from this sybarite vampire whose art form is completely ruining people's lives. She just takes them apart bit by bit and basically drives them to suicide in as cruel and as vicious a way as possible without directly physically attacking them once. So Sarah crosses paths with this sybarite over this because she saves the young man from her influence, and this offends her greatly because it's like a master artist having somebody walk in and throw a gallon of black paint on their latest masterwork, So she reacts to the great offense to this act of mercy and causes problems for Sarah in that book. She crosses swords, so to speak, with an order of mystics. And then there are various supernatural entities out there. Her little sister accidentally releases a murderous spirit from a jar in one book, and they have to deal with the fallout from that at some point. And there's a gang of vampires in LA that her sire gets angry and they go to war with them in another book. In the latest book 13, the adversary is sort of this mysterious force contained in an ancient sword.
Ooh, that one, I like that one. So I have a thing with swords. If anyone knows me, they know that. What was the hardest scene for you to write in the series?
There's a question. The most difficult scene? That's a good question. I tend to have a lot of fun with this series. When the first page is probably the most challenging, because I do this weird gimmicky thing where in any book that I write, the first word in a book, I always try to make it something related to the character, either their mindset, their personality, their situation in life, or how things are going on. Like Division Zero, the first word in book one is adrift, and that's where Kirsten feels her life is at that point. She's just adrift in the world and doesn't know where she's going or how she's going to get to this place. She has no idea where she's going to. So coming up with the first word in every book is the most challenging bit as far as I can think of right now for that series, because it is basically lighthearted. Mostly it's comedic. It's not, doesn't take itself overly seriously. Like in the 13th book, Sarah is called by, she ends up working for the vampire boss of Seattle, the unofficial vampire boss, because the vampires don't really have like an election or declared him the leader. He just kind of does it. And she's fallen in with him thinking that if she makes friends in high places, her life can be more normal, because less people will be inclined to mess with her if she has these powerful friends. But she goes in to talk to the handler that's giving her this mission, and she's like, okay, what's the MacGuffin this time? And the guy's like, what? The object of importance that's going to throw my life into disarray for the foreseeable future.
Oh, that's funny. I like that. Okay, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene to write in the series?
Oh, wow. There are, in the past couple of books, I've been adding in POV scenes from the siblings. I don't remember off the top of my head when that started, but it was around 9 or 10, I think. I had a reader in a review mention the siblings, and they wanted to see more of them, and somebody suggested maybe putting out short stories told from the siblings' point of view. And I guess I sort of did that. I just rolled the short stories right into the novel with interleaving POV swaps in some of the chapters. And in book 3, all 3 of her siblings go off on these little mini adventures that are interleaved with her story arc. The whole series is fun, but I think, I don't know, it's really hard to put a finger on which one was the most fun. I don't know if it's self-indulgent, but sometimes I'm sitting there writing and I'll get an idea and I'll write it and I'll sit there snickering to myself at what I just wrote. And I'll have my editor send me Facebook messages when she's going through it, yelling at me for making her snort her drink.
Yeah, well, if a series is that fun to write, well, then go with it, I say.
Yeah.
So are any of your secondary characters a little quirky?
Oh, yeah, they all are. I don't know if you're in terms of the character's family or I guess they would be more like tertiary characters that are outside the family. But like I said, the father is into 80s movies. Family movie night is his thing, and his gimmick is the headband, like Rambo. Whenever Sarah's going to go do something dangerous, he's like, remember to wear your headband. And at one point, he gives her one for Christmas. Mom's thing is the juxtaposition of normal with momness. In one novel, Sophia does a magical thing because the siblings start off relatively normal, but as the supernatural presence of Sarah being around them continues onward, their lives all get crazier. And at one point, Sophia, the youngest of the 2 little sisters, develops magical powers, which, according to the mystics, she always had, but they were dormant. Like humanity had magic for thousands of years, but nobody used it so long it kind of went dormant. And at one point where Sarah's trying to help out a ghost, she steals something from the mystics, who then use a spell on the little sister and basically take her body over, kick her ghost out of it, and use her body to spy on the house. And as a result of that being done to her, Sophia's magic unlocks. So in one, going back to the mom, in one book, Sophia does an enchantment that requires ruby dust, and they use the bathtub to do it. And afterwards, the bathtub is scummed up with this sparkling ruby mess. And the mother just notices that and says, "Oh, clean up your magical residue before you go to sleep," just like it's a normal kid leaving soap scum in the bathtub kind of thing. So she does that sort of reacting to crazy situations like they were just normal thing. Is probably her quirk, I would say. Sarah's little brother Sam is just more or less unflappable. He'll react to the craziest things with just like this blink effect, like the neighbor's tool shed will explode in flames, and he'll be just like, "Oh, that sucks." You know, the kid's just unflappable. I guess is the best way to describe his gimmick. Her friend Ashley is an animal lover going to vet school. Her other friend Michelle is going to law school. Her parents are on the religious side and probably wouldn't react well to vampires because they don't like Ashley. Well, they wouldn't react well to learning that Ashley is bisexual, so they aren't trusting them with the knowledge that Sarah is a vampire. They did tell Ashley's mom, and she's okay with it. She's like, "Oh, okay, whatever," you know. Then there's the boyfriend is normal. Sarah's new boyfriend, I should say, is normal, and he's taking the vampire stuff in stride for the time being, and he's actually of the opinion that they should probably just go ahead and turn him into a vampire before it gets a little weird, because a couple years down the road, people are gonna think he's her father, not her boyfriend. Keep going, he's her grandfather, not her. You know what I mean? So she's one of the more serious issues that she has to confront is, what are we going to do? A vampire can't date a mortal indefinitely. Something's going to have to change. Either they're going to have to break up, or she's going to have to turn him, and or just shift the nature of the relationship to friends and just watch him grow old and die on her. So that's part of the serious vein where like I said, it's sort of running a double dramedy on one side and funny moments on the other. That's one of the more serious aspects to the story. And also another serious thing going on is Sierra, the older of the two little sisters, is neurotically terrified of a school shooter. They did a demonstration at the school and the training for that and whatnot, and she's just had this pathological fear that it's going to happen for real. And when Sarah becomes a vampire, she eventually becomes convinced that she needs to become supernatural so she can survive it if a school shooter shows up.
Well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting take on that. So do you have a favorite character?
Out of this series?
Yeah,
or in general?
Well, or in general, either way.
I'd have to say my favorite character overall is Althea from the Awakened series and the Prophet of the Badlands series. She's a lot of fun to write. Just this completely sweet, innocent character that is, even the bad guy that tried to abduct and hurt people, she won't let him die if she can help it. She's just kind of has that genuine concern for other people no matter what the situation is thing going. As far as the Vampire Innocent series goes, it's really hard to pick a favorite. The whole Wright family is just a lot of fun. I mean, Sarah is tough. Sophia is adorable. Sierra is also adorable. Sam is just hilarious. Dad is hilarious. It's like asking a parent to pick their favorite kid. It's really difficult.
Well, you don't have to if you can't. So, as you mentioned, you write in other genres. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but I really couldn't decide what to write, so I started to write a little bit of everything. I started off with the Division Zero series, which was described by my first publisher as a cyberpunk paranormal police procedural mystery. It's set in what I call my DF universe, which is a mixture of cyberpunk, paranormal, post-apocalyptic, and there is mention of space colonization, asteroid mining, that, but I haven't really gone into that too deeply. The closest I've come to that is the Daughter of Mars series, which is predictably set on Mars. But that's in the sci-fi genre. I've written fantasy, young adult fantasy, young adult horror with witchcraft kind of angle to it, post-apocalyptic and young adult, post-apocalyptic and adult. Have a middle grade superhero book series, middle grade fantasy, young adult, post-apoc. A couple of contemporary paranormals, a serious vampire book, Chiaroscuro, urban fantasy, like not vampire urban fantasy, and the Temporal Armistice series, which is sort of an Angels and Demons kind of thing. except they're not really angels and demons. They're just extraplanar creatures that humans think are angels and demons because they look like them. And a bunch of short stories. I've also done a lot of writing projects with J.R. Rain and his Vampire for Hire series, Maddie Whimsy series, which is a quote unquote as realistic as is possible to be with witchcraft homicide detective series. Alexis Silver series, which is a mermaid private investigator, but it's a serious mermaid, kind of like the type of mermaid that lures people off boats and eats them. Mermaid, not the cute Disney mermaids.
Oh, that's my favorite. So yeah, all my mermaids are that type too. So
yeah, I remember JR pitching that idea, and I'm thinking, mermaid, really? Are you serious? And then he kind of went into describing what he was thinking of. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that could work. So yeah, Alex is a mermaid. She lived in 1920, and her husband went to war, World War I, and didn't come back. He was dead a year after he left. So she, it was not very nice being a single woman in that day and age. Nobody took her seriously for getting a job, that sort of thing. She had this drudge of an existence working at a laundromat, and one day she just had this screw it all moment and decided to take a cruise up the west coast to Alaska, not really caring where she landed or if she came back. And as it turned out, a merman decided to attack that boat for food. And the way we have structured it in that series is that the mermaids get the charm powers and whatnot, and the mermen have sort of like water elemental magic. So where the mermaids lure people off of boats and eat them, the mermen use their powers over water to capsize entire boats and pick the drowning people off as they're floundering to survive in the water. So this merman capsized her cruise ship, and everyone in it went to the bottom. And for whatever reason, he decided to turn her into it, because the way JR likes to do it is all the supernatural stuff is similar to vampires, where it can be passed on. Where like the mermaids aren't born that way; they're turned by other mers. So he turns her into a mermaid, and she's hanging there under the ocean, watching him devour people she was having a conversation with 5 minutes ago. And then, so it's set in the modern day. So she every so often snaps back to the 20s with her linguistics or slang use, and will whip out phrases that confuse people, but she's comfortable in her mermaidness at that point. And another thing about his world, it's set in the same world as his Samantha Moon book. So a lot of the supernatural creatures have a possessing entity inside them he calls Dark Masters, which are ancient magic users that played with powers they should have left alone, and their souls were thrown into the void or whatever. And as a sort of an unusual thing to the rest of his setting, the one that's in Alexis is actually friends with her. They get along very well. It's not an adversarial contest like it is in 99% of the other cases of vampires or murderers or werewolves or that sort of thing.
Cool. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Okay, probably the best place to look is my website, MatthewCoxBooks.com/WordPress, all one word. I'm also on Amazon. I have some books, Wide, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, that sort of thing. If you go to my website, there's a books gallery link at the top, and each book has a link to wherever it's available. From there, I'm also happy to send out review copies on request.
I think most authors are.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and your series sounds wonderful. And Between the Pages, we'll be back on the weekend with 2 more authors. So join us then. And that's all for now. So bye.